In the 1800s, New England lobsters were cheaper than canned beans. Today, just a pound sells for $50, making it one of the priciest seafoods. We traveled the world to see how 11 foods went from trash to treasure. Our first stop is Maine, where we learned how its lobster became a billion-dollar industry and how fishermen are trying to protect it.
For 7 months of the year, Steve and his brother Dan set sail in the dark to pick up bait.
I'm 57, he's 55. But basically, every dollar I've made has come out of the water right here since I was 12 years old.
As they motor out to their first set of traps, Dan preps that bait. Just as dawn sets in, the work takes off. And it doesn't stop. Steve and Dan will empty over 300 lobster traps today. 6 traps are strung along one line, or trawl. Color-coded buoys, like Steve's orange and blue ones, mark either end. A winch pulls in the line, and Steve hauls the 40-pound traps on board.
You get pinched, pull them out of the traps. And what hurts is what you slam your elbow onto when you're moving your arm out of there.
The team throws back any bycatch or species that aren't lobsters, like these crabs.
We don't keep anything we can't sell.
They also toss back any lobsters that are too big or too small to be legally harvested.
It has to be at least 3 1/4 inches from the back of the eye to the back of the shell. That's legal, that's big enough. If it's larger than 5 inches, it has to go back.
If they come across a female with eggs, like this one, that's also protected by law and has to be thrown back. They clip a V-shaped notch into the tail to let other fishers know this lobster had eggs.
But if you don't leave stuff in the water for the future, you won't have a fishery.
Dan fills the empty traps with bait. Acadian redfish, menhaden, and pork fat.
What we're giving them is their junk food. It'd be like walking by a donut shop and smelling the donuts cooking, so you go in.
Then they push the first trap back into the water to catch some more. They have to be careful not to get caught up in that line as it whips by. That rope is one of the most dangerous parts of lobstering. It's why these guys carry a knife. In case the rope pulls them overboard, they can cut themselves free.
He could fall off the stern. It'd be 3 minutes before I realized he went overboard. And that's not like I was ignoring him. It's just I'm doing other things.
Once the traps are safely back in the water, Steve and Dan slide rubber bands around the claws of their latest catch.
We try to ban the hard shells first sometimes because they'll bite the other ones. I have to pay for everything except for the bands. The dealers give us the bands.
Steve drops them into the tank below, so they'll stay kicking. You want a lobster to stay alive all the way until it's cooked, so bacteria doesn't grow. Because they get paid by the lobster, the team keeps a tally from each buoy line.
2. It's gonna be a long day, Dan.
They want to catch at least 10 lobsters from one trawl, or about 2 pounds a trap.
Anything under a pound is real bad. Even when we're having a bad day and we're not catching much, look where we are. I'd much rather be here than stuck in an office somewhere.
But for the last decade or so, rumors have swirled that Maine's lobster population could be at risk. Scientists track the East Coast lobster stock by the total weight of the population, what's called the biomass.
If you were to pinpoint a location where you could sort of balance that biomass on your fingertip, that would be the center of gravity.
In the 1970s, lobster's center of gravity was actually right off Long Island, New York. Because of warming water, the population collapsed there. The center shifted north, towards the stronger population off southern New England. But soon, the same thing happened there, and that population collapsed. By the late 2000s, the center had shifted all the way to the Gulf of Maine. Fishermen here experienced a surge in the lobster population. By 2016, lobster landings had hit a record high of 132 million pounds and made up almost half of what was caught in Maine. Before this boom, fishermen here caught everything from herring and mussels to scallops.
Lobster became such a financially productive activity during the boom of our landings, and most fishermen focused exclusively on lobster.
In the 2010s, going all in on lobster seemed like a safe bet for fishermen. They could earn more than any other species, and lobster's price stayed high despite soaring supply.
I think there's always risk associated with putting all of your eggs in one basket, and that's essentially the situation we've created.
But now the population is shifting again, farther offshore. Lobster eggs in warming waters inshore aren't surviving at the rates that ones in cooler waters are. Because the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans, people have been worried what happened in New York and New England would happen here. But scientist Kathy Mills says there's still hope.
We have conservation measures in place that are buffering some of the effects of warming temperatures.
Measures like maximum size limits introduced in the 1930s and V-notching in the 1940s.
The conservation measure to protect egg-bearing females is almost a century old.
These have helped slow lobster's decline off Maine. See how in the last few decades, the center of gravity hasn't moved as far as it did in the 70s, 80s, and 90s? Not only does Steve throw back lady lobsters, but his traps are also set up so small ones can escape.
So the kitchen is where the food is. You got 2 doorways in, and then this is the parlor back here where they're all hanging out after they eat. Every trap has 3, sometimes 4 vents. These vents are designed to let the lobsters out that aren't legal size.
While these catch limits in Maine have helped, they probably won't stop the population from shifting completely.
The population will not collapse. It will decline, but to levels that we've experienced in the past.
Like most scientists here, Kathy's team predicts the center of gravity will keep shifting north in the future. And as lobsters move offshore, so too do the lobstermen. Small boats like Steve's, that stay close to the coastline, are increasingly being replaced with big ones that go lobstering 30 miles out for days at a time. But big boats are an investment most young lobstermen can't afford. Even a small rig like this takes a lot of money to operate.
The traps and the buoys and the rope, probably looking at about $160,000 if everything was brand new. Am I worried about the younger generation? And I am, because we've done everything we can to keep a fishery for them. The stuff that we can't control, we can't control.
Yeah, I'm inbound, over. Yep, roger that, just checking.
On small boats, lobstermen like Steve and Dan will go out for just the morning and pull into the Portland dock around noon. They sell their catch to Luke's Lobster at $6.50 a pound for hard shell and $5.50 for soft shell, or ones that have recently molted. Ward Peck runs the tank room. His team grades the lobsters based on weight and quality as they come off the boats. Ones with 2 full-grown claws get a higher grade.
So you can tell this one lost this claw, so you wouldn't want to pay $50 for this on your plate.
They also sort them by the hardness of their shells. If you squeeze a soft shell, you can feel water inside because there's still room for the lobster to grow. That also means there's less meat. Those can only be sold to local markets before they spoil. A hard shell, though?
It's like a bullet. There's no water in here. The higher proportion of meat to shell in a hard shell lobster.
Hard shell lobsters will fetch a bit more because they survive longer and they can be exported out of the state.
Here's something that you would pay good money for at a Manhattan restaurant. It has a crusher claw, it has a pincher claw. The crusher claw is bigger, pincher claw is more narrow. 3-pound lobster, I would not want to get my finger in their crusher claw, that's for sure.
He's seen some pretty lobsters through all his years of grading.
This guy's more of an albino, and this guy is like the calico. He's albino in spots. When they're this color, they look prehistoric to me. Apparently, no matter what color they are when they're alive, once you boil them, they all turn red.
From here, Ward will drop them off at Luke's Lobsters restaurant next door, or send them to the company's processing facility, about 20 minutes away.
The first step is running it through a stunner.
Luke's Lobster wouldn't show us its stunner, but the machine could look something like this. It's a lethal electric shock, marketed as a quicker and more humane way to kill lobsters than boiling them alive. At the processing facility, we were able to catch up to the lobsters just after steaming. They go straight into a chiller to stop the cooking and bring them to a food-safe temperature of below 40 degrees.
We then break the lobster down into parts.
That's Luke Holden, a third-generation lobsterman and the founder of Luke's Lobster. Because of rising utilities and PPE costs, he says this processing facility actually loses him money.
It's definitely a really tough industry to make ends meet. There are less and less processors in the state of Maine every year.
He offsets the losses with the money he makes from his restaurants.
I'm a little bit stubborn in nature. This is the business that I love. I find like so much energy just being a seafood processor.
Workers dump out buckets of claws and knuckles onto these tables. These shellers move at lightning speeds, cracking open the claws and swiping out the meat.
It's amazing how competent those pickers are and how fast they can go.
In one shift, these pickers can shell 40,000 pounds of lobsters. This machine removes the small legs from the body. The company pulverizes the body meat into mince for its lobster bisque. But they don't waste those legs. They send them through this roller.
The leg meat is used for our lobster ravioli, our lobster cakes, our lobster mac and cheese.
All the shells get crushed into a powder that can then be used in fertilizer. At the back of the room, workers do a quality check of knuckle and claw meat
to make sure that there's no shell or cartilage before it ultimately gets packed up.
If it passes the check, the staff packs them into 2-pound bags. This machine vacuum seals them. Then they get a slow trip down this flash freezing machine, which can take less than 10 minutes to cool them down to -10 degrees. The majority of the state's lobsters are processed into parts like this. Some of these packs will go to partners like Whole Foods and Benihana. The rest head to Luke's Lobsters restaurants, where they're seeing a surge in demand.
When there's more demand for the finished goods, that trickles up to the fishermen, and that creates more economic value for the industry.
But this meat hasn't always been valuable. For most of recorded history, there were so many lobsters up and down the east coast of the US, they were considered a food of the poor. And they held that reputation for centuries. The legend goes in the 1900s, at a party hosted by the wealthy Rockefeller family, a lobster meant for the servants was served to the guests, and they loved it. Soon, overfishing made lobster scarce and expensive, cementing it as a luxury food in the US. The tail meat was especially popular. Luke's dad, Jeff, was the first licensed lobster processor in Maine, but in the 2000s, he couldn't sell the cooked knuckle and claw meat.
He had a freezer full of hundreds of thousands of pounds of cooked lobster meat that ultimately there was no strong market for.
When Luke moved to New York City for a job in banking, he couldn't find a good lobster roll. So he called up his dad, asking to buy the claw meat to start a lobster roll shop in Manhattan.
He was like, that's great. And he even offered us 90-day terms to get the business financing because it was just going to sit in his freezer anyways.
The first shack was a huge success, and they've since expanded to 35 locations worldwide.
Fast forward 15 years, the market is completely inversed. When we started Luke's in 2009, we were paying $14 a pound for cooked lobster meat. In the last 3 years, we've seen as high as $50 a pound. And I would say on average, it's in the high 30s. More demand.
The company opened its Portland, Maine restaurant in 2019.
I usually pack this cooler with about 120 pounds, and before lunch is even over, they will have gone through all 120 pounds.
Michael Tibbetts is the assistant kitchen manager, and he says the most popular dish is the lobster roll, loaded with knuckle and claw meat.
It's become a real iconic thing. We will sell over 800 lobster rolls a day. It's just a regular New England split top roll. It's our butter wheel right here. We do 3 swipes of butter on both sides, put it on the flat top, weigh out 4 ounces of fresh lobster meat, drizzle of butter, a little bit of secret seasoning, and that is the Luke's lobster roll.
As popularity for lobster dishes has jumped nationwide, so has Maine's dependency on this one crustacean.
Our overdependence on one fishery is going to always be scary, and it's always tenuous.
That's why Bree Warner launched Atlantic Sea Farms, a company that helps fishermen get into a different kind of business, kelp farming. Not only is seaweed getting more popular stateside, its harvest season is the opposite of lobsters.
We have all of this coastline. It's so protected, it's so nutrient dense. It's a perfect place to grow kelp. We have 4,000 boats that in the winter aren't doing a whole lot.
Kelp thrives in Maine's cold water.
So this is really good, healthy kelp right now. What you want to see is a nice dark olive color to it. You don't see any bare spots. You're getting several pounds each foot of line.
You obviously don't need to water them. No herbicides, no pesticides.
Atlantic Sea Farms grows the kelp seeds at this nursery.
Then we give it to our partner farmers for free. We help them find their lease, we help them with site selection, we help them with farm setup.
When Atlantic Sea Farms started out in 2018, the entire state of Maine harvested 53,000 pounds of farmed seaweed.
For the first year of Atlantic Sea Farms, we had 3 brave souls take on the risk of doing their own farms.
Flash forward to today, its 40 partner farmers harvested a record-breaking 1.3 million pounds in 2024, just in time to meet booming demand in the global seaweed market.
We haven't had to recruit anyone in years. The proof is in the pudding. The fishermen don't do things that don't make money for them.
Many are lobstermen, like Justin Papke.
Just looking at things we could do to diversify, take a couple eggs out of the lobster basket.
He considered oyster and mussel farming, but found kelp was a cheaper investment. Because he could use the same boat, ropes, and buoys as lobstering.
I had all these buoys just stacked up on the shore. It's like, well, they don't need to be on the shore. Maybe they could be making me money in the water. And kelp seemed to fit really well with lobstering in our season and our slow times.
It took Justin 3 years to get the license for his 8-acre farm.
The way we're set up, it kind of looks like an Olympic swimming pool. The kelp is on like a lane, except it's 7 feet below the surface.
Debris, like trees, can tangle in these lines, and big waves can move them.
We're not growing things on land in nice rows. We're putting our nice rows in the water, and then Mother Nature throws hurricanes at you.
Justin's biggest expense were these moorings, or anchors, that hold down the kelp lines. They can cost a farmer as much as $50,000 for a 4-acre site.
Once the kelp starts to grow, it gets really heavy, so it's better to spend a little bit more and get something that won't move.
Justin can harvest 10,000 pounds a day on average during the season.
Slowly, as we're getting better at it, it's become more dependable, and now it's a part of our income stream.
For the past 5 years, Steve has also been harvesting kelp in the spring. He spent about $22,000 starting up his farm, but he says the investment was worth it.
There's a lot less expense with the kelp once you set the farm up. You haven't got nearly as much fuel burned, and you haven't got a $600 or $800 a day bait bill. I don't find myself nearly as tired at the end of a day of harvesting kelp as I do at the end of a day hauling traps.
After fishermen like Steve harvest their kelp, Atlantic Sea Farms buys it.
We design all of the products, and we turn it into value-added products for grocery stores.
From this factory, the company makes seaweed salad, burgers, smoothie cubes, and kimchi.
I got here some skinny kelp that was harvested by one of our partner farmers yesterday. These blades clearly are taller than I am. It's really good. We wash, shred it, and we'll blanch it. And then from there, that product will go to our fermentation room, and we use that as an ingredient.
The kelp ferments in gochujang, tamari, and gochugaru for 10 days and comes out looking like this. That's the spicy seaweed salad.
Here, they're just trying to make sure everything's mixed really well together. Some of that liquid would have settled while all the product was sitting.
Finally, workers scoop the salad into 15-ounce jars. This machine makes sure the lid is airtight.
We want to get those lids on there really secure. Because it is a live product, there still can be fermentation that's happening, and so we don't want any air getting into those jars.
Each of these jars is traceable back to the exact farm it was pulled from. And at about $10 a piece, they can be more valuable than raw kelp. The company makes over 75,000 jars of fermented seaweed salad every year and sells them in thousands of stores across the US.
Our food system is so broken. It's making farmers poorer, the environment worse, and consumers less healthy. And what we're doing here on the coast of Maine to work with fishermen to diversify in the face of climate change with the most climate-friendly food on the planet, for me, that's very hopeful.
Studies show kelp sucks harmful nutrients like nitrogen out of the water, sequesters carbon dioxide from the air, and protects against coastal erosion. Even at Luke's Lobster, they're frying up these kelp burgers.
We're shifting all the time. Shifting doesn't scare me at all. If they can sell the product, we should be encouraging more fishermen to go out and harvest kelp.
So will kelp ever replace lobster? Probably not.
So kelp is not a silver bullet. Lobster's always going to be part of the fabric of Maine. We're very optimistic about a future that includes lobster and kelp and oysters and mussels, and ways that we can create a future where we can always be working on the water for generations to come.
Oxtail used to be a throwaway meat for most Americans. But after the pandemic forced meat buyers to try new things, oxtail's price tripled.
Finding oxtail on menus in the United States was rare just a couple decades ago. Pat LaFrida's family's butcher shop in New Jersey has been selling the cut since it opened in 1922. He says that in the past, the cut of beef never got much attention from restaurants. Most of his oxtail sales came from Latin American, Asian, and Caribbean communities who have cooked with it for generations.
There are many cultures that focus in on the oxtail because at one time, it was an economy cut.
One big reason oxtail was considered a throwaway is that it has a lot less meat than other cuts of beef. That's because it's mostly bone and fat, with only about 40% usable meat. To get the same amount of meat as 1 pound of another cut of beef, like sirloin steak, you'd need 2.5 pounds of oxtail.
So when you really calculate how much meat you have for poundage of product, it's not much.
Still, those eating oxtail back then knew it wasn't like any other cut of beef.
The flavor is so distinctive. You can close your eyes, probably put your blindfold on, you will know that it's oxtail.
Oxtail is high in collagen and is more gelatinous than most other cuts of beef. The collagen breaks down when it's cooked and gives the meat a buttery melt in your mouth texture.
I love oxtails. If they cook correctly, not everybody can cook oxtails. And if you season it right, oh my God, it'll last in your mouth for days.
It really is the pearl of the animal. But because it's so succulent and because it's so spoon tender once cooked, there's no mistaking that for any other cut in the animal.
And while oxtail wasn't widely in demand in the US, the story was much different in Jamaica, where food lovers have long known the value of the bony beef.
I don't know if it's a bone or something, but most overseas, they come to Jamaica just for the oxtail.
O'Shea Williams learned how to cook traditional Jamaican oxtail stew when he was a child.
It's not to be prepared like any other way.
Today, it's one of the best-selling dishes at his seaside restaurant, O'Shea's 876 Kitchen in Port Antonio, Jamaica. The dish dates back to the island's colonial era, when enslaved Africans were given unwanted animal parts like oxtail to eat. Using their ancestral cooking techniques and local spices, they turned it into a flavorful stew that's now a staple of Jamaican cuisine. The oxtail is typically chopped into 1-inch pieces and seasoned with fresh spices.
First we're gonna start with the garlic. We're gonna start with the onion next. Some scallion. We're gonna start with the pepper. Scotch bonnet pepper. Scotch bonnet add the spice. Like hot.
The meat is then slow cooked over an open fire for hours until it falls off the bone.
Really good. Everything is right. Look at spice. Very nice.
While oxtail was always somewhat of a luxury in Jamaica, the prices O'Shea is seeing today are way higher than before. That's because there's more demand in the US. 41% of meat imported to Jamaica comes from the US, including oxtail. So if prices are up stateside, they're up in Jamaica too.
I might have to raise price because the things are really getting high. I believe that oxtail price will never drop. It's always been going up and up and up.
Oxtail's popularity in the US has been on the rise since the mid-2010s, but it really spiked during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. As supply chain issues drove up beef prices in America, consumers searching for cheaper meat turned to cuts like oxtail. But oxtail was never meant to have such a high demand. Oxtail only makes up 4 to 6 pounds of a cow, compared to the hundreds of pounds of the other beef cuts. This limited supply, combined with growing demand, has more than doubled U.S. oxtail prices over the past decade, from $6 in 2015 to $14 in 2024. Today, Pat says oxtail is the most expensive he's ever seen it.
The demand for it is as high as it's ever been.
To understand just how much the price has jumped, we visited Chef Judith Abel at Swirl Wine Bistro in South Florida. She makes an oxtail ravioli that costs more than double what it used to.
When we first opened Swirl, on the menu, it was under $20 for the dish.
Today, it costs $48. Oxtail was one of Judith's favorite dishes growing up as a child in Jamaica.
I can remember around 10 having oxtail. It was so good, oh my goodness. It's always an upscale family meal. For better holidays, you'll get some oxtail. People are coming over to your house on a Sunday, you'll cook oxtail.
It wasn't until she moved to the US in 1986 that she realized just how inexpensive the cut of meat was outside of the island.
It was like $1 and change. We were cooking oxtail at my sister's house because, oh my goodness, oxtail is like so cheap here.
But as the price of oxtail rises, she can barely make a profit from it.
There was a point where we were like, yeah, we're not putting it on the menu. So we had stopped serving it for a while. Right now we have to cap it because how much can you sell, ravioli for? But for now, I'm just making it out of love.
With a $48 oxtail ravioli dish, it's safe to say consumers are feeling the impact.
Oxtail prices are just getting out of hand, fam.
That's Jamaican comedian Marlon Palmer. In 2016, he sparked an online movement bringing awareness to rising oxtail prices with the hashtag #MakeOxtailCheapAgain. It all started when he saw the price of an oxtail entree at his local Jamaican restaurant in Toronto start to rise.
I went to Albert's and I looked at the price and I was like, this is not the normal price. And so I made a Instagram story or like a Snapchat or something, and I was like, can you look at this?
$20 for a large oxtail in a tin? What is that?
And at the time, Trump was running on his Make America Great Again campaign. So I was like, make oxtail cheap again. This is what we need to be campaigning for.
The hashtag quickly garnered thousands of mentions all over social media, with longtime oxtail lovers sharing their experiences.
Through doing it, I realized how many people felt the same way but just weren't saying anything. It's that sense of community. We're all in on the joke. We all know what's at stake here. And we're treating it like this dire situation that's not dire, but to our community, it's dire.
Business Insider found itself in the middle of the controversy. In 2023, our food page reposted a video about oxtail on Twitter, garnering over 36 million views and thousands of reposts. In the replies, oxtail lovers like Marlon tried their best to steer people away from their favorite food, jokingly claiming that consuming it could cause severe ailments and even death.
I kept putting like the vomit emoji and telling people yucky. Anytime someone would bring that up, I was like, you eat that? And like just making it seem grotesque. Cause like at a certain point, propaganda is the only thing that's gonna save us. We gotta start lying to these people. I'm pretty sure that worked on a couple hundred people. Any little bit makes a difference, man. Any little bit.
But behind the jokes, there's still some real concern among OG Oxtail fans.
I think there's anger that it got out because we found a way to make what other people think was trash treasure. I think that's what really connects us to it. Like, we had it in-house for so long, nobody knew how great this was, and then the internet just propelled it to new heights.
But the debate isn't only about price. There's also the question of the right way to make oxtail.
Them like new stuff, yes, they like try new stuff, but after a while them try the new stuff, then automatically I go come back to the old stuff because they're not going to have the taste that what they're going looking for. No way.
Feels like a trend because like you see it in like your oxtail tacos, oxtail syrup, oxtail cereal, and they have now remixed it 500,000 times into different concoctions that I do not approve of. It's a mess now. It's gone overboard. And that's part of why I think the price has gone up as well.
This way of thinking puts Judith and her oxtail ravioli in an awkward position.
Because I'm Jamaican chef, they have this expectation. Oh, we're going to a restaurant that is a Jamaican chef. Oh, they have oxtail on the menu. They're expecting it to be on the bone, the traditional way. I worked in England, Wales, Switzerland. All of these experiences influence how I cook. How could I just cook oxtail the same old way? Of course I'm gonna find another way to cook it.
To make the dish, she starts by trimming excess fat from the oxtail and browning it on all sides. The key to making oxtail tender is cooking it slowly at a low temperature in a flavorful stock. Once it's done, the meat is fall off the bone tender. Due to oxtail's long cooking time, making a batch of ravioli takes Judith 2 days. But Judith says she can't achieve the same flavor with any other cut of beef.
It had to be the oxtail.
Judith cooks the oxtail again for another 4 hours in more wine and beef stock.
Well, that's gonna cook down. And the reduction of this oxtail is what we're gonna use as the filling for the oxtail, for the ravioli.
When Judith first considered adding oxtail to the menu at her restaurant, ravioli wasn't her first choice. Her goal was to pay homage to her Jamaican heritage while also distinguishing herself as a chef.
I mean, there's a lot of Jamaican restaurants that you can go and get traditional Jamaican food. We want to set ourselves apart.
It took years of trial and error to come up with this dish. Today, the oxtail ravioli is a customer favorite at Swirl.
We had to put it on the door, home of the oxtail ravioli. I'm selling out of oxtail like every week. I can't keep up.
While she is concerned about the price hikes, she says it shouldn't stop her or other chefs from creating innovative oxtail dishes.
There will always be a chef who's going to try to take it to the next level. I've seen chefs smoke it and then braise it. I've seen chefs who slow smoke it for days and so it's falling off the bone. Have at it, be creative.
Today, Pat LaFrida delivers oxtail to all kinds of chefs and restaurants, including high-end ones. Despite many people's fears, Pat insists there's still plenty of oxtail to go around.
Unless there's some evolutionary issue with cattle, it's never going to disappear.
As long as the demand for oxtail is there, people are going to buy it, and people are buying at a higher price anyway. They may not buy as much, but they're still buying it because it's like it's in our system at this point.
High-end foie gras, or fattened goose liver, is a costly and controversial fine dining staple. And this foie gras is 6 times as expensive. Here in Extremadura, Spain, Eduardo Sosa is one of the few people in the world making what his supporters call ethical foie gras.
Toma, bonita, toma, 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 bonita, toma.
Many consider foie gras to be unethical because it's typically made by force-feeding ducks or geese to fatten their livers. Eduardo does things differently, and it makes his product incredibly pricey. A 180-gram jar costs over $200. But what exactly makes this foie gras ethical? And why is it so expensive?
Mi familia lleva haciendo este sistema desde que sepamos nosotros el año 1812 y desde entonces no hemos parado. Nuestro foie se produce pues de una forma muy sencilla. Nosotros tenemos una serie de gansos salvajes domesticados.
When the weather turns cold and the bird migration season begins, wild geese join the tamed geese on Eduardo's farm. Here, the geese feast upon grass, acorns, olives, figs, and different seeds.
Fijaros cómo lo comen y que les encanta la bellota.
Instead of force-feeding the birds, Eduardo simply relies on the geese's natural behaviours. There are no fences here. The geese are free to come and go as they please. Eduardo says the geese eat more grass when they're free to roam. He says this is essential because the grass apparently makes the acorns taste sweeter to the geese. And the more acorns the geese eat, the tastier and yellower their livers will be. While Eduardo prefers to let the geese eat what they want, he does provide them with organic corn to make their livers more yellow.
Hace años nuestro hígado era mucho más oscuro que el que es ahora, y entonces viendo en el mercado que la tendencia era una cosa más amarilla, más blanquita, más tal, pues se nos ocurrió de darle maíz ecológico, porque nos dimos cuenta que dándole maíz ecológico es como un colorante, entonces queda más bonito el hígado, ¿no? El foie.
During this time of year, geese stuff themselves full of food to prepare for their winter migration. This quickly builds fat and enlarges their livers, the perfect conditions for creating foie gras. When it's time for the slaughter, Eduardo uses a traditional technique to stun the geese: hypnosis. He says this makes the process as painless as possible. It happens only once a year during the coldest part of winter, when the geese have the most fat. It also has to be a moonless night.
Pues que localizamos las quedas, ¿no? Donde están los grupos de gansos, y luego con luz, vamos con una luz LED muy potente y hacemos que se queden hipnotizados, ¿saben? Las aves cuando le da una luz fuerte pues se quedan quietas y se quedan hipnotizadas. De esa forma las podemos coger fácilmente y además el animal pues no sufre absolutamente nada. Es una muerte dulce, como se dice, ¿no?
Eduardo's foie gras is so highly sought after because of how flavorful it is. To preserve its unique flavor profile, Eduardo prepares his foie gras very simply.
Hemos cogido el horno, le hemos metido leña, lo estamos calentando y luego lo que vamos a hacer ya en estos envases especiales para conserva es calentarlo para que se cocine y como si fuera una cocina normal, ¿vale? Esto es lo que llamarían los franceses un hígado entier. Entier es que es una pieza entera del ganso metida en el frasco y cocinado, no tiene mayor historia, no lleva absolutamente nada, es 100% natural. Y el sabor pues maravilloso, un sabor muy suave, una crema, algo increíble, es un sabor extraordinario. Sabe a naturaleza, sabe una mezcla entre bellota, semilla, hierba, un toque dulzón por los higos y da, pues bueno, es algo único, algo único. El ganso se aprovecha absolutamente todo, ¿eh? Entonces, cuando hacemos el proceso, también aprovechamos las pechugas para hacer este delicioso jamón.
Que publicitamos siempre que el foie es algo que se debería consumir una sola vez en la vida, ¿vale? No queremos que se abuse, no es un alimento que por mucho dinero que tenga una persona no debe abusar del consumo. Es algo que hay que probar, disfrutarlo en una ocasión muy especial.
So despite the high demand, Eduardo won't make more than 2,000 batches a year. He says he's committed to maintaining the wild geese population and heavily discourages overconsumption, unlike most foie gras producers.
Bueno, pues la industria lo que ha hecho es aprovechar la capacidad natural del ganso de generar grasa en su hígado, pues para hacerlo industrialmente. Les ponen una temperatura para que los gansos se crean que están en invierno, le ponen un aire acondicionado muy frío, entonces, y le empiezan a dar mucha comida con una máquina que le entra en el estómago y le empiezan a meter comida. Pues que le dan de comer muchas veces durante el día para generar muchísima grasa. Entonces el hígado se le pone bestial, imaginaros, puede llegar a pesar hasta 2 kilos el hígado de un ganso, más o menos. Entonces, y eso lo hacen en 7-8 días, ¿vale? Cuanto en la naturaleza pues necesita un año, una vida, en fin, hay mucha diferencia. La industria ha inventado un foie aprovechando los genes del ganso y entonces inventó un animal hecho en laboratorio que es el pato que le llaman pato mular o pato mudo. Entonces es un animal hecho en un laboratorio y entonces lo que hacen que lo han hecho mudo para que no moleste, para que no esté dando chillos y tal, y consiguen un hígado muy grande. Ese es el foie que come todo el mundo en los restaurantes, en todo el mundo, que es lo que hay, es una barbaridad.
In recent years, climate change has pushed back the farm's traditional foie gras making timeline.
En la época de mi padre, pues los gansos se elaboraba el producto a finales de octubre y ahora pues nos vamos a noviembre, diciembre, enero, incluso algún año en febrero, algún año hemos tenido marzo, pero bueno, que al final lo importante es que haga frío, que las bellotas y las hierbas y todo salgan, eso que lo mismo nos da un mes más, un mes menos o 2 meses, ¿no?
Regardless of when it's made, Eduardo's foie gras, or natural foie gras as he calls it, has an extremely long waiting list every year. There was limited demand for Eduardo's foie gras until 2006, when he and his team won the coveted Coup de Coeur Award at the Seal Food Expo in Paris.
Desde entonces comenzó de verdad la demanda. Bueno, fue cuando el CIFOG, la Asociación de Productores de Foie de Francia, nos quiso impugnar el premio diciendo que nuestro foie al ser natural no se podía considerar foie. Están continuamente poniéndonos demandas y están siempre que si el nombre, que si tal. Entonces, para no tener conflicto con ellos, siempre decimos que nuestro producto no es foie gras, ¿vale? De esa forma, nosotros ahora le denominamos foie natural gras, no foie gras.
Despite challenges and criticism from other foie gras producers, Eduardo's product has only continued to become more popular.
Te das cuenta que los grandes chefs del mundo, los mejores chefs del mundo, pues alaban el sabor, ¿no? Dicen que es algo increíble. Tenía el caso del chef Dan Barber en Estados Unidos, que dijo que era lo mejor que había probado en su vida, ¿no? La experiencia culinaria más grande de su vida, porque es que es algo diferente, totalmente.
La Pateria de Sousa's natural foie gras costs €199 and sells out every year.
El precio no creo que baje nunca, puesto que mientras se siga produciendo a pequeña escala, pues bueno, tenemos que compensar el coste de una cría de pocos animales en muchísimo territorio, pues con el precio es algo lógico y normal.
Despite the hefty price tag, Eduardo says he doesn't see much of a profit from his foie gras. Geese require more land than other livestock. Most people in his area prefer to raise Iberian pigs, which are very profitable.
Por eso la gente, los vecinos, pues no tienen mucho interés en criar ganso. A nosotros nos ven como un poquito los locos del tema. La cría del ganso, pues bueno, es mi pasión, ¿no? Claro, no, es una pasión, es mi vida, es mi pasión. Mi padre me enseñó, yo estoy enseñando a mis hijos y lo que queremos es que esto no se pierda, ¿no? Y que la gente, ojalá saliera más gente a producir ganso.
But it wasn't Eduardo's family who invented the natural foie gras tradition.
Fueron los hebreos los que vinieron a la península ibérica y trajeron esta cultura del antiguo Egipto, ¿no? Es una forma muy inteligente primero de respetar al animal, segundo de obtener grasa pues para la cocina. Ellos tenían la sabia costumbre de instalarse en los pasos de migración de aves, como es el caso de esta granja, ¿vale? Entonces, ellos tenían una serie de gansos salvajes domesticados, ¿vale? Que domesticaban y que hacían que luego atraían los gansos silvestres a la granja, ¿vale? En épocas de migración. Pues bueno, tenemos que, gracias a estas personas, desgraciadamente, estas personas judías tuvieron que abandonar España, expulsados por los reyes católicos, con el famoso decreto de expulsión del año 1492. Nosotros, bueno, pues nos quedamos con ese legado, con esa sabiduría de estas personas, y aquí queda pues un poquito de su historia.
In the 1800s, American oysters were cheaper than eggs, but over-harvesting has driven up the price.
Oysters have been around for a while. Estimates put the shellfish around 300 million years old, at least, and humans have been enjoying them for centuries. Oyster cultivation was invented by Sergius Arata, a Roman engineer also often credited with the invention of underfloor heating. And since his invention, oyster farming has become big business. While you may be seeing oysters on the menu more these days, their popularity now is nothing compared to just 200 years ago. Oyster sales boomed from the early 19th century onwards, and the shellfish were sold as street food across London, Paris, and New York as they remained a cheap and accessible snack to many. In 1860, the small British seaside town of Whitstable alone was sending 50 million tons of oysters to London each year. And by 1900, New York was eating 1 million oysters every day. But as their popularity grew, so did the problems. Industrialisation and dredging of the waters in England led to overfishing. And as more people moved to the coast, more and more sewage ended up dumped in oyster-growing waters. Soon there were outbreaks of typhoid and other diseases, and many oyster beds had to be closed. Hard winters and new diseases killed off many of the remaining native oysters, and gave the shellfish a bad reputation that lasted for years to come. There's something else that kept the price of oysters down around the turn of the century: child labour. In the early 20th century, American photographer Lewis Hine captured photographs of many of the children working in the oyster industry, even photographing 4-year-old Mary, who had apparently shucked 2 pots of oysters each day. Things had to change though. We soon realised the importance of clean water in the oyster growing process and outlawed child labour. Making oysters environmentally safe and ethical to grow came at a cost, as the shellfish take a lot of work to produce. And now, when oysters are raised, the environment they're grown in is one of the main considerations.
Here, there's no industry, there's very little even farming here. What you've got out in the loch is just everything that is naturally in the loch. So they're feeding on the best possible feed that you could want, and they couldn't be an any more natural product.
Each oyster takes 2 to 3 years to mature, and they start out microscopically small. The tiny shellfish are grown in hatcheries. When they're large enough, they're transplanted to their final growing place.
Well, we get the oysters in from our hatchery when they're about your thumbnail size. We will grow them in these baskets for approximately 2 to 3 years, and then we'll send them to the depuration centre for depurating and then for packing for dispatch.
At Loch Fyne, every oyster is depurated, a process that cleans the oysters and removes any dangerous bacteria. Every single oyster must be checked by hand. Making sure that each oyster is shipped live is paramount.
Believe it or not, we sell roughly about 35,000 oysters every week out of here, and every single oyster is individually checked. So what we would do is, when we're packing the oysters, we'd pick up 2 oysters and we would tap them together. Now, you can obviously see that one's dead, but when you're packing thousands at a time, you won't necessarily see it, and sometimes it's only open just a little tiny bit. But when you tap that oyster, you can hear it's hollow straight away. And that is the best way to tell if an oyster's going to reach its shelf life, whether it should be discarded.
Oysters may only have a 9-day shelf life, but that doesn't stop them being shipped all across the globe. And their popularity and image as a luxury treat means that their demand is only going to rise.
Harvesting acai is a dangerous job in Brazil. Workers climb thin palm trees deep in the Amazon rainforest.
Ela pode chegar lá em cima, no pegar do cacho, ela quebrar, no meio que ela é frágil.
These berries have become one of the most popular so-called superfoods in the US, and they aren't cheap. One bowl can cost up to $15. And while the berry has exploded in popularity in recent decades, small farms like this haven't really been able to cash in.
A gente fica com a menor parte do lucro aqui na comunidade, né?
To this day, most acai in Brazil is harvested by families on small-scale farms. But big plantations are on the rise, putting pressure on families like Lucas Nogueira's and a way of life that goes back generations.
Mas é uma dádiva de Deus. Uma importância muito grande para nós, para nossa alimentação, para nossa sobrevivência.
So how did this Amazonian fruit become so trendy? And what is the true cost for the people who have been harvesting it for generations?
Vem junto. Aqui tem um cacho, aqui, olha aqui, ó, açaí. Olha aqui, açaí, ó.
We met Lucas at the end of the 2021 harvest, but there were still some berries left on a few trees. His family's farm is roughly 70 miles from Belém, the capital of the state of Pará, which grows more than 90% of the acai produced in Brazil. The only tool they use to climb is a single piece of rope called a piconha. They used to be made of leaves.
Essa folha aqui, a gente pegava, torcia ela, aí passava por aqui, fazia isso, para ver como o tempo vai mudando, né?
Today, Lucas's son Luiz Fernando will go up.
Se tiver, só põe que tiver maduro, não tá que tiver paró. Pode subir, vai com cuidado.
The trunks are so thin that climbers have to be lightweight.
É perigoso, sim. O cara tá lá em cima e uma árvore quebrar. É arriscado o cara quebrar o braço, quebrar a perna.
At the top, they swing from the tree to reach multiple bunches. Going down can be dangerous too, especially while carrying a large knife and holding an armful of branches. Dropping them could damage the fragile fruit.
Graças a Deus eu nunca caí dessa iseira. Quero que isso não aconteça comigo.
Eu já caí 3 vezes dessa iseira. Não me bati nenhuma vez, graças a Deus.
And the risks don't end at the climb.
Exclusivamente a gente anda nessas áreas, tem muitos animais, né, que nem cobra.
Lucas and his family harvested 53 baskets like these in 2021, earning them an income of about $950. That's as little as 20 cents per pound. Meanwhile, a pound of processed acai sorbet can sell for $7 or more in the US. Part of the issue is that Lucas has to sell his acai as soon as possible because the fruit goes bad fast. That leaves farmers who don't have processing machines with little leverage to negotiate.
Não tem empresa aqui na nossa comunidade. A gente vende para atravessador, para poder chegar na mão daquelas pessoas que vão beneficiar, que vão se dar bem.
Merchants bring the acai to Belém by boat. It's a race against the clock to sell the fruit before it spoils, so markets run overnight.
O açaí apanhado hoje, ele dura em máximo 48 horas. 72 é assim, extrapolando.
The price of the baskets varies every day, depending on the demand.
Hoje, em média, paneiro desse aqui está custando, hoje, 60.
Most of the acai produced in the state stays in Brazil, but exports have skyrocketed, growing about 14,000% between 2011 and 2020.
Você sabia que uma tigela de açaí nos Estados Unidos custa R$80? $15.
Quanto?
$15.
$15? Não sabia não.
Some acai gets transported to processing facilities like North Acai. Every day, 22 tons of fruit are turned into frozen pulp, the acai that most people outside of Pará are familiar with.
O açaí é uma películazinha com caroço. Então 95% do açaí é caroço.
This is the stage where we see the biggest jump in price, about 177%.
Esse produto tem que estar congelado em menos de 24 horas. Aí a gente vem para cá, onde aqui é o túnel de congelamento. A polpa fica congelada nesses monoblocos, aonde a gente depois leva para a câmara de estocagem e guarda ele para vender ele no mercado internacional e nacional.
Today, more than 70% of Brazil's acai exports end up in the States.
Nós estamos muito presentes, muito forte, tá? Na região da Flórida, a região de Nova York, a região de Nova Jersey, aquela costa leste americana, de norte a sul, nós estamos bem presentes.
The global market for acai is expected to reach nearly $2.1 billion by the end of 2025.
Mercado como a China abrir as fronteiras para consumir esse produto, vamos aumentar.
Acai's popularity took off in other Brazilian states in the 1980s, when it became part of workout culture in Rio and Sao Paulo. The bowls made regular appearances in this popular 90s soap opera that took place at a gym. Its high-calorie content made it a perfect pre- or post-exercise food, and its antioxidants made it easy to brand a superfood. That came with claims that it can solve all sorts of health issues, like
obesity, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, strokes, hypertension, high risk for COVID-19, cognitive difficulties, sexual difficulties.
But nutritionists say this narrative has been blown out of proportion.
Wait a minute. One food can't do that, can it? No, of course not.
Nonetheless, Americans were hooked and made all kinds of acai bowls, mixing in fruit, granola, honey, and more. But it's a far cry from the culture of the people who have eaten it for much longer. Indigenous people living in the Amazon have harvested and consumed acai for centuries, maybe even millennia, and it's still a staple food in the daily diet of people in Pará who eat it fresh with savory meals. Lucas was 12 when he started climbing acai trees, and he still does, 36 years later.
Aí eu tirava para o meu consumo, para ajudar meus pais. Então eu acharia que ele não tinha condição de me bancar, né? E aí comecei a apanhar o açaí, né? Para me manter, para minha roupa, era sorteiro, meus calços, sapatos.
In recent years, acai has also made headlines in American and Brazilian media for reports of children working in the industry. But farmers like Lucas say it's always been this way, and that it's normal for everyone in the family to help out and learn the trade.
É uma cultura, porque vai passando de pai para filho, de avô para neto, né?
Nowadays, Lucas owns this land along with 55 other families. These kinds of settlements are called quilombos, or a quilombola community, and many go back centuries. They were established by enslaved Africans and Afro-descendants who ran away into the jungle and started communities like this to survive. Many learned from indigenous people how to harvest and process native foods, including acai. The Brazilian government estimates there are nearly 6,000 quilombola communities in the country, and a 2013 study found roughly 75% still lived in extreme poverty.
Mas é uma comunidade rica, né? A gente se diz assim pobre, mas se torna rico, né? De espírito.
Lucas's acai trees grow alongside different native trees and plants. But larger monoculture plantations that produce more fruit are on the rise. The amount of land used for these plantations has more than tripled since 2006.
A gente trata como sistemas homogêneos muito frágeis, né? De pouca resiliência.
These plantations are often located far away from floodplains where acai trees naturally thrive. That means big producers have to irrigate their acai trees, while farmers like Lucas rely on natural seasonal flooding from the nearby river.
Isso sem falar no problema da biodiversidade por inteiro, né? Se você, enfim, transforma a Amazônia em plantios.
Some small producers have also been favoring acai trees over others, which could become an issue in the long run. And experts worry that as acai's popularity continues to grow, the cultural traditions of Pará and the Amazon could be lost.
Tendendo a transformar o açaí numa commodity. Isso é ruim. Aí tudo depende da escala, porque, né? Enfim, não interessa. A qualidade é pouco, mas tem qualidade. Não é isso que interessa.
Acai is something Lucas and many people here take pride in.
Esse aqui é o processo do nosso açaí para o nosso consumo local. Isso. Olha aí, a gente bota um pouquinho de farinha aqui dentro, né, do açaí. Tira aqui um pedacinho dele aqui, um pouco do feijão, um pouco do arroz. Aqui. Aí, um pouquinho do açaí. Então experimente como nós, para vocês sentirem o sabor do nosso açaí paraense, o açaí normal, puro. E vocês vão ver a delícia que é o nosso açaí. Obrigado.
For centuries, caviar was a cheap food eaten by the lower class because the fish it came from, the sturgeon, was so plentiful. But as it spread from the Caspian Sea to fancy European restaurants in the 19th century, demand went up. Today, all sturgeon fish are endangered, making it expensive and difficult to harvest caviar. We learned how one entrepreneur started Africa's first caviar farm.
Traditional caviar can only come from sturgeon. They're native to the northern hemisphere. Many of the most popular species come from the Caspian Sea, where waters can be much colder than Madagascar's.
Dans les autres endroits de Madagascar, les côtes de Madagascar étaient tout à fait inadaptées à l'élevage des sturgeons parce que les eaux auraient été bien trop chaudes.
That's why the founders raised their fish in Lake Montezuma, about 1,400 meters above sea level. The team spent months crossing thousands of miles in search of temperate waters like this. The lake rarely tops 25 degrees Celsius, and it gave this farm an advantage. While sturgeon in the Caspian Sea might grow slower during cold winters and hot summers, the company says fish here mature year-round, thanks to these moderate temperatures.
À Madagascar, on peut dire qu'on a 3 ans d'avance sur les croissances, sur la performance, et 3 ans d'avance aussi sur le caviar.
The whole process starts in the hatchery, where they care for thousands of baby fish until they're mature enough for the lake. Sturgeon are notoriously tricky and expensive to raise. Compared to other farm fish, like salmon, sturgeon need a long time to grow. They can take a decade to mature, while a salmon only needs 3 years. So operating a sturgeon farm could cost 5 times more than a salmon one. But the team's first hurdle was keeping the fertilized sturgeon eggs alive along thousands of miles to Madagascar. They failed 4 times, trying to import them from France and Russia. But the 5th time was the charm. The company imported 35,000 healthy sturgeon eggs back in 2013.
Les gens se moquaient de nous, clairement.
That's Delphine Dabazi, one of Asapenser's founders.
Et même les plus grands experts nous ont tous déconseillé de nous lancer dans ce projet faux. C'est que le 26 juin 2017, le jour de la première production du premier poisson, que nous nous sommes dit qu'il y avait une chance que ça fonctionne.
Nearly a decade later, they've grown their fish population to over 60,000. And they raise 6 different species, one of which was thought to be extinct. Only female sturgeon produce caviar, so once they're big enough, the team separates them by sex.
Avec l'aspect extérieur du poisson, on ne peut pas déterminer le mâle de la femelle. Donc du coup, on est obligé d'utiliser un échographe.
The females head to the farm. With 16 hectares of pens, the fish have room to move.
Comme dans tout élevage surdensitaire est voué à l'apparition d'agents pathogènes. Donc au plus on réduit la densité, et plus on limite ce risque.
That's Jérôme Bastide. He's the farm's breeding manager.
Donc au maximum, on ne va pas dépasser 25 km².
They use 3 nets to contain the fish in the pens. One where the fish live, an extra net in case they escape, and a net on top to hold back birds. 10 full-time weavers make and mend the nets on site. It takes 31 miles of rope and a month of weaving to make just one net. Acai has hired and trained 300 Malagasy workers. The company says it pays 3 times the minimum wage.
Tena hita nisy fivanon tao sena tokantranonay mampivoatra ny tsena na afahanay very da ny zanakay afaka miana.
A team heads out to feed the fish 5 days a week. First, crews test the water. When there's enough oxygen, they can start adding feed.
Alohan'ny ame sakafo dia lemana sakafo mba tsy hitsingevana dia afangaro tsara. Dia aparitaka tao ampovoany tsara mba tivoaka ivelany. Dia hohanina ny ba. Dia hohanina ny paille. Dia ariana ato anaty kazy.
That's how the food will sink to the bottom, where the sturgeon eat. The company produces about 60 tons of feed a month, made from a base of fish meal and vegetable meal, like soybean or rice bran, yeast, and water. If the fish aren't fed the right thing, Jérôme says they could take twice as long to grow.
Donc d'où l'importance d'avoir un aliment sur mesure par rapport à son espèce.
Et je vais dire que ce qui coûte le plus cher dans l'exploitation, c'est la production de l'aliment du poisson.
The company spends over $130,000 a month on feed alone. Acai makes the food on site and sources about 80% of its ingredients from farms nearby.
Ça a développé toute une économie locale en fait. Il y a les paysans, il y a les épiceries.
Donc ça c'est le tout de soja. Ça c'est local.
Arimonda manages the feed mill. His team grinds all the raw materials into powder. Machines then cook and shape the feed into granules. The recipe and size of the pellets change based on the age of the fish.
Plus le poisson est jeune, plus il a besoin d'énergie. Plus le poisson est jeune, plus il a besoin de protéines et de lipides.
Feed is such a big expense for Acai because the fish eat so much of it.
De 4. Donc ça veut dire que la femelle a besoin de 4 kg de granulés pour produire 1 kg de poisson.
Indro, maraina et après-midi, amuru.
While the sturgeon feed, there's always a diver watching below the surface to see how quickly the fish eat and how deep they go. Every few months, Jérôme's team pulls fish out of the water. He checks for roe in the sturgeon using this ultrasound machine. These fish were born in 2017.
Et tous les points noirs et blancs, ce sont du caviar.
He measures the roe to help determine which fish need more time to develop their eggs. They isolate the fish that need a few more years to mature. These females are Persian sturgeon. They'll spend the last few weeks of their lives in cold pools.
Qui va permettre en fait d'arrêter le métabolisme de la femelle et d'avoir une très bonne qualité des œufs. Cette étape elle est très importante parce que c'est l'étape qui va nous permettre d'enlever les mauvais goûts que le caviar peut avoir s'il y en a.
These species can be harvested young, at only 7 years old.
Une fois qu'on a abattu les femelles, on va faire la saignée et on va les rater jusqu'à ce qu'il n'y ait plus aucune goutte de sang qui sorte du poisson.
This sturgeon weighs 16 kilos, but they can go up to 20.
Justo ang tanan na ru. Iya to ani para niya luwa to kay kin pa banya tun tanan na raya. Daya to para niya bat. Sumari sistema mafis pa. Sumar mafis tin. Ya dewa pita kata natin feed or like KVP.
The valuable roe makes up about 1/4 of its body weight. Mandim bin Salama worked as a cook before joining Asapenser. But the roe isn't finished caviar just yet. Workers run the eggs over a sieve to separate them from the fish's innards. Then they wash the eggs to remove any leftover bits. These workers spread the roe out so they can see any misshapen or discolored eggs that need to be removed. Now they race against the clock to salt the roe in a minute.
Pourquoi 60 secondes? Parce que si on le fait plus, ça risque de ramollir les œufs.
Any less time, and the eggs won't have a consistent salty taste. The salt, along with 4 months of aging in these fridges, helps develop the caviar's nutty flavor. A kilo of Rova caviar can go for over $5,000. The cost is on par with European brands. Asapenser exports 90% of its caviar to Europe, but it's up against stiff competition. China is Europe's biggest supplier. It raises sturgeon on massive farms like this one, 3,500 times larger than Asapenser's. Since 2014, China has been selling the most expensive caviar, the kind harvested from beluga sturgeons, seen here at a farm in Florida. But Asapenser is still years away from harvesting its first beluga roe, because it takes nearly double the amount of time to raise the high-priced fish compared to other sturgeon species.
On ne sait pas encore combien on va produire en vitesse de croisière. La vitesse de croisière, ce sera à partir de 2026, 2027 ou 2028, quand nos belugas commenceront à bien produire le caviar.
Until then, Asapenser is trying to sell the caviar types that are ready. The company has opened offices in Paris, Brussels, and New York City in hopes of hooking Western markets on African caviar. The team has already managed to convince chefs at some of Europe's top restaurants.
Faire découvrir des produits comme ça à nos clients, c'est splendide.
Boris Campagnella is the executive chef of Le Crine, a Michelin-starred restaurant. He was one of the first chefs in Paris to put Rova on the menu, back in 2019.
C'est-à-dire que j'ai pas entendu parler, elle est venue me voir un jour, je crois que c'était il y a 3-4 ans, elle est venue me voir dans la cuisine. Elle m'a présenté un caviar, déjà elle a ouvert la boîte. Je dis pas grand-chose, je goûte. Le produit incroyable, un goût, une teneur en bouche, la dureté des œufs, enfin la couleur, enfin tout. Je dis mais comment vous faites pour faire un truc pareil?
He's topped dishes of torch shrimp, lamb tartare, and ceviche with Rova caviar.
J'aime mettre un plat dans le menu avec du caviar.
Like this dish of abalone with brown butter.
Ça c'est de la groseille de mer. Mais on annonce à chaque fois qu'on arrive à la table, on annonce caviar de Madagascar. Donc forcément, ça interpelle. Ah, qu'est-ce que vous avez dit, chef? Caviar d'où? Je connais pas, il faut du caviar Madagascar, mais incroyable.
And Boris isn't the only chef who's stocked these tins. About 15 restaurants across Europe now serve Rova. The company's success abroad has allowed it to invest back into Madagascar. Assepenser started by training locals, like Tafitasoa Ediarivoni
Tia narefany orinasa nanao formation
and Menchka.
Niasa talohan'ny orinasa mbola tsy teto aloha dia betsaka ny ankizy teto Mantasoa mbola tsy anasa. Dia rehefa nisy ilay société mipetraka teto dia manodidina zato ny mpiasa avy ao Mantasoa lasa manana asa ato amin'ny Assepenser.
Au départ, on avait beaucoup d'expatriés du monde entier. Et à aujourd'hui, petit à petit, ce sont les Malgaches qui ont remplacé les expatriés.
Satria mponina avy ao Mantasoa izay tsy nahalalinina momba ny Oysters zao no niakatra lasa cadre dia tena faly be mihitsy.
The company provides rent-free housing for its workers. The housing site also has a grocery store, a mini theater, and a gym.
Nous, on prépare les repas du personnel, à peu près 300 personnes par jour.
That includes 3 meals a day. Most of the employees' food is grown on site.
L'idée est de tirer Madagascar vers le haut et de le sortir un petit peu de sa pauvreté. Et je trouve que plus on fera des produits de luxe à Madagascar, plus on aidera le pays à se développer.
Sea urchin was once a filler ingredient in Japanese sushi rolls. Today, its unique flavor has caused global demand to rise and made it more expensive than lobster.
Sea urchin, or uni, is a prized delicacy in several parts of the world. Today, the yellow-orange gonads are often served in sushi, and even right out of the shell. Hundreds of urchin species exist, but only a select few are coveted food, including the red sea urchin here in Santa Barbara. Known as California gold, these gonads are prized because they're large, buttery, and sweet from the kelp they eat. To find gonads like this, divers need to collect individual sea urchins by hand. Michael Robertson has been diving for urchins for 15 years. He starts his days early, sailing out before the sun rises. It takes him and his crew about 2.5 hours to reach a good diving spot.
See that little island up there? That's called B Rock. That's where we're going. So all this green right here on top of this red, that's reef, is vegetation. That's a good thing. That lets us know it's not sand and it's just not bare rock. If there's vegetation, maybe there's urchins.
Michael looks for abundant kelp forests to help him decide where to dive. More kelp typically means better quality urchins.
2010, on a good day, a diver could harvest maybe up to 2,000 pounds a day of good quality sea urchins. Now the divers are typically coming in with about 300 to 500 pounds a day, so a quarter of the amount.
But surprisingly, parts of California's seabeds are full of urchins.
If they wanted to, they could still bring in 2,000 pounds a day. There's a lot of sea urchins out there, but there's a lack of kelp. So even if you bring in 2,000 pounds, if they're not marketable, then we don't harvest them.
If you want to compare how it was to how it is, this was solid kelp from here all the way in, all the way down. And now you have just little pockets here and there.
That lack of kelp impacts the value of red sea urchins. It also strains the ocean's ecosystem and the species that rely on kelp forests for habitat. Along with warming waters and pollution in recent decades, a certain sea urchin is to blame. Sea urchins can survive for years without eating, even without gonads. And after the decline of sea stars, one of its predators, in 2013, the purple sea urchin population exploded, consuming more than 95% of California's kelp forests as it grew. Purple urchins are smaller and produce fewer gonads, so there's little commercial demand for them. And as purple urchins multiply and eat more kelp, red urchins with good gonads become harder for divers to find. Finding the right spot to dive is just the first challenge. Getting your hands on these spiky creatures is the main one.
Some people wonder if sea urchin diving is a dangerous occupation. It can be as dangerous as you allow it. If you don't keep really tight tabs on your gear and the mechanics of your boat, it could easily kill you.
To make the job easier, Michael and his partner Fred need specific tools.
So this is the one essential piece of equipment everybody has to have. It's called a rake. It's custom made. Everybody has their own take on how they like to have it done. I've got all these fancy colors on mine because if I ever drop it, I'll be able to see it on the bottom. And my daughter loves putting the tape on.
Once they're suited up, Michael and Fred head to the bottom and begin collecting urchins one by one.
All right.
Even with the proper gear, a good dive is never a guarantee. Typically, there are only about 5 gonads inside each urchin. And without enough kelp for the urchins to feed on, the gonads start to shrivel up. In some cases, an urchin will be totally empty inside.
We do crack urchins on the bottom so that we can see what we're picking, if there's enough product inside and what the color's like inside.
To make things more challenging, Michael can only harvest urchins at least 3 1/4 inches in size.
You can't just go out and pick empty urchins. So there's a lot more empty urchins than there is beautiful, packed urchins that you want to sell. Depending on what they're eating, depends on the grade of the urchins.
We got lucky on that one. Oh, right on. Sounds good. Okay, cool, man. See you on the inside there.
After a 12-hour day to the islands and back, Michael returns with 750 to 900 pounds of urchins. The shelf life of fresh urchins is short, so they need to be delivered to processors that same night. By 4 a.m., Gene Damachi's team is already cracking and cleaning each one by hand.
And today we probably have about 10,000 sea urchins to go through.
The gonads are extremely fragile, and they only stay fresh for about a week. Workers crack each urchin down the middle to avoid breaking any of the gonads inside. Then it's time for one of the most crucial parts of this process: cleaning the gonads. This stage requires sharp attention to detail. If workers don't totally remove the intestines inside the urchin, the gonads degrade faster. And if any of the gonads rip during this process, they immediately drop in value.
If the gonad breaks, then it drops a grade or 2. And when it goes from an A++ grade and we have to drop it down to B grade, the value is maybe about a quarter of what it could have been.
Workers then sort the gonads by color, making sure each tray has a uniform shade of yellow or orange. After they've packed each wooden tray, they use tweezers to inspect each gonad again and gently remove any remaining kelp, shells, or spines. The most valuable gonads make up the A++ grade. Gene sells a 200-gram premium tray like this for $100. These uni are bright yellow or orange and come only from the sweeter male urchins. They're primarily sent to restaurants. But Gene doesn't come by this quality of gonad often. He typically only finds 1 premium gonad out of every 100 urchins. Sea urchin gonads weren't always valuable food in the US, particularly in the 70s, just before Gene's father opened Tradewind.
The government used to ask the divers, the local divers, to smash them, kill them at the time, until a Japanese person came along and said, no, this is actually a delicacy in Japan. And after many trials and errors, we also found out that Santa Barbara sea urchin is actually really, really good, like one of the best in the world.
Santa Barbara urchin was traditionally shipped to Japan until economic collapse stalled things in the mid-90s. Fortunately for Gene's family and other US producers, a sushi boom took off in the US around the same time.
Those of us that was able to make the transition from the Japanese market into the US domestic market survived at the time.
Today, Gene ships his product across the US.
Uni is one of the few seafood out there that they really haven't perfected farming yet. Until somebody figures that out, uni is probably going to be a limited, highly sought after item.
This ultimately raises the price of rare premium gonads.
This year, we're actually seeing a good quality, high quality uni that we haven't seen in about a decade. We're seeing a lot more colder waters. We're starting to see kelp grow back where it hasn't grown back in the last 10 years.
Just 50 years ago, bluefin tuna was mostly used to make cat food. But its popularity on the Japanese sushi market led to the massive fish selling for up to $3 million.
This bluefin tuna is 363 pounds. It's known as the king of sushi in Japan for its color and texture. Some of the highest quality bluefin are auctioned for millions of dollars at the Toyosu market in Tokyo. At almost 4 million square feet, the market is a one-stop shop for fish from all over the world. Here, tuna is sliced, packaged, and sold to high-end clientele and grocery stores alike. But before it's sold, experts must first bid on the top-tier tuna, which can go for millions. In 2019, a Japanese restaurant chain paid over $3 million for a 612-pound tuna. And at the center of this action are expert tuna scouters like Takayuki Shinoda. He's a Naka Aroshi, or intermediate wholesaler. His job is to select the best tuna from around the world for his customers. But the future of Takayuki's job is in jeopardy. The population of bluefin tuna is down 97% over the last decade, which means there will be less of a need for Naka Oroshi like Takayuki.
ただ私がこれから10年後、20年後、30年後にその時にマグロがなくなってしまうんじゃないかな。
Takayuki has been a Naka Oroshi for 30 years.
私の石地という店はですね、先代の祖父が創業したお店で。
For him, work starts at 4:30 a.m. At Toyosu Market, there's no such thing as a normal business day. Octopus and squid arrive a day earlier. Fresh fish like horse mackerel and sardines come in before midnight. And truckloads of tuna are dropped off every hour.
取扱量としては水産物は1日約1400トン弱。それから金額にすると14億程度ですね。
That's almost $13 million. And tuna is the market's most popular product. Each day, the fish make their way from the boat decks to the auction floor. But it's more than just the type of tuna you find in a can. There's big eye tuna, ideal for sushi and sashimi, yellowfin tuna, perfect for grilling at restaurants due to its high fat content. But most bidders are here for the bluefin. Between 3 and 5 a.m., wholesale employees lay out tuna one by one. Bidders like Takayuki have about 15 minutes to evaluate dozens of fresh tuna before the auction begins. Sushi restaurants, supermarkets, and department stores all depend on Naka Oroshi like him. Takayuki looks at the quality and cost.
僕はですね、もう本当に見た目ですね、その一瞬のフィーリングというか直感を信じて、魚を選んでます。基本は、皆さんやってる通りのことがあって、まず尾っぽ、尻尾の部分が切れてるので、そこの断面、あと腹ってお腹の部分がですね、裂いてあるので、そこを見て腹の内側の部分をですね。
Any sort of nick or flesh wound can lower the price by thousands of dollars. When tuna is reeled in, it can wriggle and writhe, causing a chemical reaction in the muscles. The movement speeds up decomposition and makes tuna sour, soggy, and less tasty.
品質が 100% のものが 30%、20% にまで落ちてしまうんですけど、そうなることが僕は一番の資源の無駄遣いだと考えてるんです。
When the bell rings, the bidding begins. A range of hand signals known as teari are used to place bids, an index finger for 1 and 2 fingers for 2. But whether that's 1,100 yen a pound or 12,000 depends on the type of fish being auctioned. In just 10 minutes, the auction's over and winning bidders claim their prizes.
今日のマグロの競りの価格は、今日マグロ本体がですね、そんなに大きくないんですよ。103キロっていうマグロだったんで、トータル金額にすると、軽自動車ぐらいの価格ですね。
The tuna then makes its way from the auction floor to the intermediate wholesale building for filleting. Toyosu keeps the temperature between 50.9 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit to slow decomposition. Wholesalers also rely on a fleet of small trucks known as tare. They zip through winding corridors to minimize how long the fish are exposed to air.
やっぱり魚がまず空気に触れることが、品質劣化のまず第一なんですね。それが空気に触れさせないようになるべく必要以上のものは下ろさない、さばかない。
The Ishiji team works as a unit to move the heavy tuna onto the cutting table. To prepare the tuna for cutting, first they wash it, then remove the ice.
細かくやんないで、今みたいにそれでシューってやるのを何回かやった方がいいよ。
もう叩ける人がいないっつうの、あのサイズ。
自分が選んだマグロがその通りだったかどうかっていうのは、やっぱり魚をさばいてた時に初めて、合ってたんだ、間違ってたんだっていうのが分かりますね。それまではやっぱり分からないので、すごく不安はあります、今でも。
Most of Takayuki's high-end customers care about two things when it comes to raw bluefin tuna: color and taste.
色がいいとやっぱりどうしても味が薄くて、で味がいいと逆に色はいいんですけど、色持ちが悪いんですよ。僕が例えば一般の方が見学とか、お見えになって、味見させてあげるんです。で皆さん、大概がですね、醤油つけなくても美味しいねって言っていただけることが多いですね。
It's then brought inside the shop where it's divided and filleted. Customers show up early to get the first pick.
どの辺がご希望ですか？場所どの辺でも構わないんで。真ん中辺で、はい。2.9。これは腹紙って言って、マグロの部位の中で一番高価な部分ですね。
Not a single part of the tuna is wasted, even its eyes.
私どものお客様、顧客にはですね、主にそういう、ミシュラン。
Customers have relied on the market's high-quality fish products for decades. Before the market moved to its new location and was renamed Toyosu, it was known as the Tsukiji market.
築地はですね、約80年以上も前にできた市場でして、その築地市場ができた時は荷物の輸送が鉄道だとか、それからあと若干船とかを使って市場の中にお魚だとか野菜を入れてくるという思想に基づいてできた市場でございましたが、
Tsukiji was the epicenter of seafood. Its success spurred demand for all types of fish. Fishing for bluefin tuna in the Western Atlantic rose by over 2,000% in 1970. But it was difficult for the market to keep up.
その80年の間に施設自身も老朽化してきているということもございますし、それから築地についてはですね、屋根はあったんですけれども壁がなくてですね、あとそういう空調もですね入っていなかったということもあって、夏が暑くなっている時とかは商品の傷みが激しかったというようなところがございます。
Meanwhile, Japanese tuna consumption was growing significantly.
それに伴ってですね、やっぱりその漁獲量っていうのもおのずと、 上がってくるわけなんですが、やっぱあんだけの魚、魚体のものです。大きなものです。あそこに育つまでに何年もかかるわけですよ。それをここ数年でですね、どんどん取っていってしまったら、やっぱり数量は減ってしまうし、これからですね、どれぐらいそれが継続できるのかっていうのはすごく不安があります。
Japan has since placed a quota on the number of bluefin tuna caught, but it's a double-edged sword for wholesalers like Takayuki.
それはもう実際の毎日日々の生活はすごく苦しいです。それで漁獲枠が決まってしまったので、魚がその場所にいてももう取れなくなるんで、豊洲に入ってこないんですよ。これは長い目で見ればこの方がいいんだって自分にふうに思ってますし、最後までマグロ屋でいたいですね。死ぬまで。
Texas barbecue began in the 19th century as a way for butchers to use up cheap, unsold cuts of meat. But barbecue's commercialization in the late 20th century, along with the inflation of meat prices, led to barbecued cuts of brisket costing over $30 a pound.
Welcome to Austin. We're going to 4 of the best barbecue spots in Austin, Texas. Now, what do you think we will be doing to measure the bestness of said barbecue?
On this trip, we're looking at 3 main things when we're talking about barbecue.
All right.
We're looking for bark.
Yep.
We're looking for tenderness.
Definitely.
And we're looking for juiciness.
Yo.
So, there are a lot of things that go into barbecue, but those are the 3 main things we're looking at. And we're going to be trying brisket,
Definitely.
obviously.
Yep.
We're trying the ribs.
Ooh, ribs.
And the sausage, which is my favorite.
All right, maybe get a little coleslaw or potato salad or beans in the mix, please.
Mac and cheese, maybe. All right, we're going to Louis Miller first, so let's go.
Let's do it. I thought you said go this way. Louis Miller has been smoking some of the best barbecue in Texas since 1949.
Located in Taylor, Texas, many people refer to it as the Cathedral of Smoke.
Central Texas barbecue is very unique. We use offset smokers. We use a lot of post oak wood, but we're really beef centric. It's that combination utilizing convection heat rather than radiant heat that creates a cooked meat that doesn't have to be chopped, sauced, and bunned, but can actually be sliced out similar to, say, prime rib. It's sort of that engineering and technology that has allowed brisket to become sort of the calling card of Central Texas barbecue.
It's the best barbecue in Texas. The first time I ate here, I had a sausage. First time I ever had barbecue. I bit the sausage, squirted all over me. Best sausage I ever ate, best brisket I ever ate. I'm gonna come here until I hit the dirt. You get all that?
What makes great barbecue? Great food, great atmosphere, great service. As soon as you walk in, not only are the optics there, but your sense of smell is being overwhelmed by smoke, different types of fats that are being cooked, rendered, and emanating from our pits. For our small Central Texas meat market tradition, it's really about the beef, it's about the smoke, it's about the simple seasoning, and it's about the love that goes into it.
Everyone says it's like their dad's favorite. It's like old school, classic Texas style barbecue.
I just want to get in the meat. When he's talking with the interview, all this meat just salt and pepper, right?
Yep.
I'll go pre-sauce.
Yeah, I'm gonna go no sauce because that's just the way it should be.
It's amazing how much flavor just the salt and the pepper can bring out of this meat.
It's like brisket candy, almost.
Yeah.
The sausage, I am so excited for. I love beef sausage.
Whoa.
Sausage is the sleeper of barbecue. People need to realize it's not grocery store sausage, it's far from it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The casing has this really nice snap to it.
Yeah.
And that's like what I look for in sausage specifically. Like, you're gonna get food all over your shirt
No,
during
I'm
this.
not.
Yes, you
No,
are.
I'm not. One thing we discovered is that Louis Miller is one of the few places that serves beef ribs every single day.
Yeah, most places only serve them on the weekends.
Look at this. How beautiful does that look? That looks so tender. It's so soft.
And like, I know I'm not supposed to play with my food, but how can you resist?
It's too big of a piece. Hello.
Do you see the beauty and the majesty that's involved in this process? I'm obsessed with barbecue. This is stop number 1, and I don't know how we're gonna top this.
Can't imagine the other brisket being better than this.
Should we have some potato salad for dessert?
Yeah. Another day, another barbecue joint.
This time, it's Micklethwait Craft Meats, right in the heart of Austin.
All right, we are on our way to Micklethwait.
Micklethwait. There is an H, but it's Micklethwait.
It's completely outdoors. It's kind of hot.
Hot as hell.
Yeah, but some say it is the sleeper hit best BBQ in Austin, so we have to go.
Yep, ready to do it. Cruise in the back.
Yep. You guys hungry? Yeah.
We're here because our friends brought us here to celebrate my birthday. This is tremendous. It's incredible. It's so good. So good.
I'm not sure Sydney and I were ready for the heat when we got to the trailer.
I'm like sweating more. The meat sweats are happening.
Yeah. Just hand me a napkin, please.
Do a little dab. It's a schwitz.
You just sweat it. It gets hot in the pit, 130 degrees in the summer in there, so Texas summer, get used to it. I think the defining thing that I really believe you cannot have good barbecue without is cooking with wood. To me, that's like the one thing, is if you say you're not cooking with wood, then it's probably not, I don't think it's gonna be good.
Obviously, Tom and his team use post oak for their barbecue.
And while they have the standard brisket, ribs, and sausage, they also have a lot more.
We're talking beef cheek barbacoa, smoked chicken, and pork shoulder.
And don't forget the sides. They have everything from cheesy grits to Frito pie to healthier options like kale coleslaw, roasted beet salad, and who cares it doesn't have cheese on it.
Okay.
That's it.
Let's start with brisket. And what's funny about the brisket that I've noticed is that you really don't even need a fork. It just kind of like falls apart. Do you see?
Oh, wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whoa.
It's so tender.
You know what I like about it is that it's not like, it's not super salty. The bark is perfectly seasoned.
It's so subtle that the fattiness of the meat that's melted all together just gives like this creamier taste.
Sausage?
Yes.
Okay, there's 2 kinds.
Which one do you want to do?
Tex check.
What's that?
I think it's like a mix of beef and pork.
Okay.
It's a mix of beef and pork.
Whoa.
Great
Snap
casing.
on that.
Yeah.
Snap on that casing.
Snap's amazing. I like the mix of beef and pork, honestly. Adds extra flavor.
Absolutely.
Okay, so these are pork ribs.
I know normally do beef.
Yeah.
But they have the pork ones, and like I can't like stop looking at them. Like every time I look, I'm just like, my mind is like ribs right there. I'll take this one because I was touching it before.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for being super considerate. So tender, so much flavor. I know that everyone gets the beef rib, but I love pork spare ribs. They're so good.
These are terrific. Add a sauce up.
You gnawed on yours weird.
How am I supposed to eat it?
I don't know. It just looks like gnawed on.
No, boom, boom, boom. It's like I eat my ribs like corn on the cob.
I have to explain to Joe how to eat food sometimes.
No, you don't. I got this. See, this is how you eat a rib. I don't know where they're getting this meat, but it's absolutely fantastic.
The meat store.
Yeah.
I like these pickles too.
All yours.
They're thick.
We actually about to go to the Franklin one, but the Uber driver just told us like here's awesome, and then he just brought us here, and then we really enjoy it.
Well, that is the perfect segue into our next spot, Franklin Barbecue.
The restaurant is legendary for its lines, which can last for over 3 hours.
Are you kidding me? We gotta wait in line this long?
pre-ordered, don't worry.
Oh my goodness.
I've never waited in this line. It's like, I've been to Austin X amount of times. I can't do this.
Yeah, not happening. No way. I'm looking forward to how this food tastes. How about you?
I'm lukewarm on it.
Yo, I gotta get a tank top.
You're flying?
Are you taking it to the airport?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm bringing it to my team back in Seattle, Washington.
Wow.
The most delicious rib, literally falling off the bone, as you can see. It's definitely worth it.
We should have brought beer.
Yeah, we should have. I don't know, maybe it's like a Texas thing or maybe an Austin thing, but they're like tailgating, waiting for barbecue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the whole thing, right? It's like, you know you're gonna wait, so you might as well bring some beers and hang out and like make it fun.
All right, after all that waiting, we finally got our food.
But there was just one problem.
So you can't eat the to-go orders at Franklin's, apparently.
But you can eat them in your hotel pool.
Yes.
We think.
This is like the most legendary barbecue in Austin, I think. I mean, I didn't want to like it.
Yeah.
You know?
With all the waiting, totally coming into this with a negative attitude, like, oh, you think you're so great because everyone's waiting in line? Let's see how great it is. That is great.
It is. It's just the right amount of everything, the right amount of fat, the right amount of bark. It's amazing.
I gotta go for
Let's
a rib.
Rib it up.
I mean, these ribs.
Whoa. That's really flavorful.
It's perfectly tender. It's falling apart, but it's not like sopping wet.
Mm-hmm. It tastes rich somehow. Uh-oh. Ah! Bees.
Thank you. Thank you, Franklin's.
Moving on to the sausages. These are the most like smoky looking sausages I think we've seen, honestly. The rest of them have been... I'm putting that in the end.
I've heard of a beehive hairdo, but this is ridiculous.
You have barbecue sauce on your face.
So what? You have bees in your hair.
It looks like more like beef jerky than it does a sausage, you know?
Not to be putting anything down right now, but of the sausages we've had, that isn't my favorite. I like the snap to it. If I don't want to say dry, but it's like a little tough.
It's got a very distinct flavor. It's unlike the other brisket we've had, and I think that if you were to put it in a lineup with some other food, like you would know.
How jiggly that is.
Killing it.
Yeah, dude. Good call on this one. Hey, you want to go jump in the pool?
Yeah, go for it.
Finally, it's over to Leroy and Lewis for some less traditional smoked meats.
They stand out among barbecue spots in Austin by serving pulled pork with crispy chicharron and adding kimchi alongside brisket.
It's really juicy, really tender. Love the way they cook it. Their sides are really awesome. I mean, I feel like barbecue is like one of those like sacred things, but they're trying to do new stuff with it.
Growing up in Texas, and Central Texas specifically, barbecue is a big thing. I eat a lot of barbecue. I like barbecue a lot. I want to eat it as much as I can. I don't want to feel good about the stuff I'm eating, the ranches I'm supporting. We do that with our business. We buy everything from Texas, from local, sustainable ranches, and just try to really push the boundaries on what we can call barbecue.
Often, sourcing sustainably means not always having standard barbecue staples on the menu, but that just keeps things interesting for Evan and his team.
Without even looking at the menu, they'll just order brisket and ribs and jalapeno cheese sausage and coleslaw and potato salad and beans and all this stuff we don't have. But as soon as we carve them off a little piece of the beef cheek, as soon as we give them a little piece of that pulled hog with the crispy skin on it, they're in, man, they're in.
We do not have ribs here.
They don't have ribs?
No ribs.
Why not?
They only source from local farms and places that raise meat sustainably, and perhaps they can't get the ribs they want.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I mean, I appreciate that. I respect that.
Good
It's
for them.
2019. I think the break from tradition for maybe the younger generation is exciting.
What do you want to do first? Brisket?
Brisket, yeah.
Okay. Whoa.
Wow.
I can already notice the difference in the texture of this brisket than the other ones that we've had. Especially the bark is the crispiest, maybe, which I love.
The fat is not as distinct on one part or the other. I feel like it's got like a nice marbling and like fattiness all the way through.
And what is this?
This is the beef cheek. Should we try that?
Yeah, let's do some cheek.
All right.
Let's work together.
Yes, thank you.
Whoa. Whoa. That's incredible. I've noticed that all of these meats, the best meats we've had, have somehow been like defying physics, where they've been really juicy and really tender, yet really put together, and just like not falling apart, not sloppy. No clue on how they do it, but...
Well, I think the key is that you have to let it rest, and that lets the juices kind of like fall back into the meat. Because if you slice something open right when it's finished cooking, all that juice just falls right out.
Yeah.
So resting is key. That's why you see everybody wrapping the meats, and then they unwrap them and slice for service.
I want to try the sausage.
Yeah, me too.
Oh man, the snap. The snap! You're so right. You're so on the money with sausage having like that really good snap.
This is almost like crispy snap. It's not like bounce back, it's like crunch. You know what we're missing out on is this kimchi.
I've never had kimchi with barbecue.
I love the pickles and the kimchi. Like cuts through the richness of what's going on this plate. Let's talk about this pork, because the skin, like...
That wasn't a crispy skin.
That's crunchy. I love this pork so much because I'm so sick of eating beef.
And now it's time to determine the best of the best.
You know, we've had a lot of really delicious barbecue. I am full of barbecue. I'm sweating from the meat. And today...
And the insane humidity that's out here. It's so hot.
The humidity too.
You gotta pick.
Let's do it.
Let's go. I can see your thing. Hide it.
You ready? Two.
A one. Whoa.
Wow.
I can't believe it.
Is that an X or a T?
T. It's good. It's going off the board. And I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong. Sorry, Mickle Waits.
Okay, you know what? This is my number 2.
Really?
Yes. I mean, look, This is OG. It was so good. The brisket was great. They had the beef rib every day. The beef rib. Nobody else does that. They all only do it on the weekend.
All right.
I respect the beef rib every day of the week.
Right.
Everything about that place just screamed perfect Texas barbecue to me.
Sure. What I like the most about Micklethwait is they did everything great and they put their own little spin on it. They didn't reinvent the wheel. They just did their own specific way, and that to me elevated everything. I think with Micklethwait, altogether, everything just works so perfectly. I'm like dreaming about that brisket.
Here's what I'll also say about Louis Miller, the sausage, all beef.
Yeah, good point.
Everything had its own great element, but I think overall, Louis Miller, all beef.
Okay.
Texas, best barbecue.
So I'm gonna go ahead and fold and waffle and say that Louis Miller was the best barbecue in Austin, Texas.
Look, Micklethwait's great.
Yeah.
Franklin's is great. Leroy and Lewis is great. They're all delicious, but I think this is the best.
I'm a city slicker. I'll say whatever it takes to get out of a sticky situation.
All right, well, let's go to the airport.
Okay, bye.
Quinoa has been a staple food for South Americans for centuries. But as awareness of its nutritional qualities spread around the world, its price soared. Today, the farmers who grow it can't afford to eat it.
While different varieties of quinoa now grow all over the world, Royal Quinoa only grows in southern Bolivia, near the Salar de Uyuni salt desert. It grows larger than other quinoas, and it's considered to be even more nutritious.
Es la única planta que puede producir en estas zonas. Es algo mágico la quinoa.
Here, at 3,600 meters above sea level, farmers still use traditional methods to harvest quinoa. Bolivia's mountainous terrain means it's difficult to modernize production, but the farmers also follow tradition to honor the earth and their ancestors.
O algunas familias ancestralmente lo hacían en el arrancado de la quinoa, pero viendo el requerimiento de los mercados que están exigiendo, ahora hacemos el uso del hoz. La parte más difícil siempre es la cosecha, porque se requiere bastante personal. Los primeros días, en todo caso, ahí siempre se siente el resentimiento del cuerpo, porque no es una actividad cotidiana del día, es una vez al año. Y posteriormente, al segundo o tercer día, ya el cuerpo mismo se va habituando a la actividad.
The farmers drive over the quinoa with tractors to thresh it, or to separate the grains from the stems. Because of the high altitude, everything is done early in the morning to avoid the humidity. After the threshing, the quinoa is taken to be sifted, which removes any remaining stems. This usually takes place in the afternoon and depends on wind conditions. The quinoa needs to have all its saponin removed as well. Saponin is a bitter-tasting chemical that protects the outer shell of quinoa seeds from pests and disease. Royal Quinoa also has a lot more saponin than other quinoa varieties, which is what allows it to grow in such extreme conditions. It also means cleaning the quinoa for consumption is a lot more time-consuming. The saponin has to be either thoroughly washed off or removed via special machines that won't damage the grains. And then, it's time for the grains to be separated for processing. While some of this is done by machine, many parts can still only be done by hand. This intense process drives up labor costs.
Esta inspección en laboratorio de control de procesos es a mano. Hasta ahora no se ha inventado ninguna máquina que pueda separar este tipo de impurezas, como la paja, como el cuarzo, como la piedra. Por eso tenemos que hacer un uso intensivo de la vista y de la mano, ¿no? Por eso es muy costoso, pero nosotros aseguramos así que la quinoa real sea la mejor en el mundo. En Acai recibimos aproximadamente entre 30 y 40 lotes mensuales, los cuales son procesados en esta planta. Estamos hablando de aproximadamente unos 1,000 toneladas al mes.
Because Royal Quinoa production happens on a relatively small scale, when global demand for quinoa first started ramping up in 2006, prices skyrocketed. In just 5 years, Royal Quinoa tripled in price on the international market, hitting $3,200 per metric ton. The coloured varieties of Royal Quinoa are even more expensive. Red Royal Quinoa has sold for around $4,500 a metric ton, and Black Royal Quinoa nearly twice that. The UN even declared 2013 the Year of Quinoa to celebrate its health benefits and growing popularity, which only increased worldwide demand for it. many Bolivians moved back to their rural hometowns to grow quinoa to take advantage of the profitable crop. In just 6 years, Bolivia's quinoa fields more than doubled in size, and many farmers stopped following the traditional method of allowing the land to rest every other year. The profits from royal quinoa were life-changing. People were able to build new houses and send their kids to school. Quinoa's hefty price tag, however, meant some Bolivians could no longer afford to eat it.
Nosotros íbamos para reunirnos con productores, pero en la alimentación no había quinoa.
But why was quinoa selling for so much? Well, in recent years, there's been widespread global demand for healthier food. And there's no healthier food than quinoa. UNESCO even named it the perfect food for humanity because it's gluten-free and has all 9 essential amino acids. NASA's astronauts eat quinoa during long space missions because the gluten-free grain is so packed with fiber, protein, and vitamins, and is a great substitute for animal meat. Quinoa also contains phytoestrogens, which are thought to help prevent cancer and other diseases. And since royal quinoa is one of the largest varieties, it's considered to be even more nutritious. So, Bolivia's royal quinoa crops were extremely valuable. But the international demand for quinoa and unprecedented profits that came with it have spelled disaster for Bolivia's share of the quinoa market. The rush to produce more quinoa has caused severe soil erosion and infertility.
Podemos ver los efectos de ese trabajo intensivo de producción en quinoa real que ya no producen nada, o salen algunas plantas, pero han quedado improductivas.
Many farmers have been focusing on quinoa instead of rotating it with other crops or livestock, which has drained the soil of nutrients. And with fewer farmers raising llamas, there's less manure to fertilize the land. Recent droughts and storms have also damaged Bolivia's royal quinoa crops.
El año pasado la cosecha ya fue mermada por principalmente la sequía. Fue un mal año. Este año tuvimos el fenómeno de la niña. Inicialmente una sequía donde necesitaba la planta poder desarrollarse en sus primeras etapas. Posteriormente se presentó lluvias permanentes. No permitieron que la quinoa pueda desarrollar naturalmente, porque la quinoa no requiere de mucha agua.
So production is down, and the quinoa plants themselves are much smaller than usual. And despite the high demands and low supply, prices have been falling.
Lo que pasa es que si bien hubo muy baja producción, la expectativa del productor es que los precios puedan subir. Pero no ocurre eso porque el mercado no lo manejamos. Ahora el mercado tiene mucha quinoa, entonces van a tener que alinearse a los precios competitivos que se tienen.
Other countries growing quinoa have more modern technology than Bolivia, so their crops haven't been as affected by weather conditions. Peru has taken Bolivia's spot as the world's top producer of quinoa, and even though Peru does not grow royal quinoa, and in fact no other country in the world can, most consumers aren't aware of the difference. The price of royal quinoa has dropped from $294 per 100 kilograms to just $83. Bolivia went from exporting 30,000 metric tons of quinoa in 2014 for $200 million to 33,000 metric tons for $81 million in 2018. Farmers are operating at a loss, and they're unable to invest in the equipment they would need to modernize. The fall in quinoa prices, however, has reintroduced quinoa into many Bolivians' diets.
En la caída ahora vemos que el consumo ha mejorado de la quinoa. Los precios ya son accesibles inclusive para la población de la ciudad, no como esas veces era tan caro que era muy difícil acceder a comprarse quinoa, ¿no? Hay un efecto interesante en que muchos municipios, el subsidio alimenticio, lactancia materna, está siendo utilizada la quinoa como base de la alimentación. Eso es bien importante, pero falta. El consumo de quinoa todavía en Bolivia es bajo.
Bolivia is also looking to rebuild a market for its royal quinoa. After all, the global quinoa market is valued at around $90 billion, and it's expected to grow to nearly $150 billion by 2026. In 2020, Bolivia's royal quinoa industry successfully obtained a protected designation of origin. This will help brand royal quinoa as a high-quality product you can only get from Bolivia, similar to Spain's Iberico ham or Italy's San Marzano tomatoes. Ideally, this will improve Royal Quinoa sales on the international market and allow producers to raise their prices, which will, in turn, allow farmers to modernize their methods while staying sustainable.
Bueno, contra el clima es muy difícil poder hacer alguna acción, pero sí podemos mejorar la parte biológica, la producción. Podemos incidir en que estas pérdidas no sean como las que se está viendo, sino que sean menores, mejorando la fertilidad, reponiendo la vida del suelo y que sean más productivas. Eso podríamos y estamos haciéndolo, ¿no?
Japan's Wagyu beef wasn't always synonymous with luxury dining. Beef wasn't common in the Japanese diet until the late 19th century. It wasn't until the 1970s that the country began promoting the product as a luxury commodity.
This is 伊藤牧場の、サーロインです。月齢は、40ヶ月のサーロインですので。
Hiroki Ito is a third-generation Matsusaka Wagyu farmer. On his farm in Tsu, Mie Prefecture, you will find only virgin female cows. It's the primary requirement for any of the 80 Matsusaka Wagyu farms here in the Mie Prefecture.
オスよりもメスの方が、味も美味しいですし、柔らかさもメスの方が柔らかいです。匂いでいうと香りがいいですし、味でいうと甘い味ですし、柔らかさでいうと口の中に入れたらとろけると。
Matsusaka beef has long been praised for its extremely low melting point, which is half that of other types of Wagyu. This means that when cooking, the fat melts in a shorter time.
融点が低いのでちょっと溶けてきていますけど、この融点もこの指で触ると分かるようにこうスッとへっこんでいきますね。融点が低いと滑るんですよ。この光っとるように手もね滑ります。
To reach this intense marbling, old generations of farmers like Hideo, Hiroki's dad, used to feed cows with beer.
昔は食体を起こした牛、食が落ちてきた牛に1代目の正和が与えてまして、でそれを僕は若い折に一緒に手伝って当時関わって飲ましたことはあります。普通の一般の元は昔はキリンビールとかそういうので普通一般的な銘柄はありません。僕が宿農しましたのが25歳の時でございますから、今73歳でございます。誰がビールを飲ましとるっていうのは、まず私は今はもうなくなったと思ってるんですけど。
Although there's no evidence that this practice increases a cow's appetite, many associate Matsusaka Wagyu with it. The fact that Matsusaka has kept a relatively low profile internationally has almost transformed this practice into a legend.
やっぱりそんなに好きじゃなさそうだったんですけど、どうなんですか？
口から飲むっていうのを強制的にやっとるもんで、多分飲んでからあとはほろほろ酔いながら食欲増してると思います。
Hiroki doesn't practice this anymore. Instead, he has perfected the feed and is practicing circular agriculture.
そしてそこから取れたお米から取れる稲わらです。胃の中を整える役割で最初にこのわらは食べさせます。この後、濃厚飼料を与えます。ふすま麦、大豆かす、トウモロコシと配合されていまして、そして濃厚飼料は肉をつけるためですね。牛を大きくするのに与えるのが濃厚飼料です。
The cost of feed is an important factor that drives the prices up. To reach that soft marbling, Matsusaka cows need to eat a lot. They also need to eat for a much longer time than other cows.
1.5 倍ぐらいはかかっています。
Matsusaka cows are raised for 30 to 32 months, 6 months longer than other Japanese black cattle. Everything adds up over time for Hiroki. The costs of feeding, temperature control, air circulation, and cleaning the enclosures regularly to avoid flies.
100万で子牛を仕入れたら、そこから肥育で100万円経費がかかりますので、200万円かかっているということになります。
Farmers here call this raising period fattening. For the first 3 to 4 months, cattle eat grass to develop a strong digestive system. This is called the belly creation period. Then comes the finishing period, where cattle gradually switch to concentrated feed and rice straw to fatten up. Hiroki is now experimenting with even longer periods of fattening, raising his cattle from 35 up to 40 months. But raising cows for such a long time can also be dangerous for Hiroki, as a cow could get sick and die.
その長期肥育をしている間に当然牛の寿命というのがありますから、肥育期間が長いと当然人間でも一緒ですが、病気になったり、食欲不振になったり、あと体感の温度が感じにくくなったりと。でやっぱり長期肥育というのはいろんな面で体に負担がかかってしまいます。
A cow at the end of its fattening period is a true treasure. Every year, Matsusaka cows get auctioned off and one gets crowned Queen of Matsusaka. While the highest ever price for one of these cows was 50 million yen in 2002, this auction has never really seen a low price, averaging around 20 million yen. Events like the auction have also fostered another legend, that farmers in Matsusaka massage their cows with alcohol. This time, it is not to improve their appetite, but their appearance.
うちはその生体の予選会で通った牛だけやります。生体の外から見る優勝を競う牛については必ずそういう掃除をしてきれいに出さなあかんっていうことやもんで、けどもうちの牧場は清めとしてやる。はい、こうするとこういう形になってド派手に見せたいもの。ビールよかはやられてる方の方が多いと思います。
It's not just adult cows that cost a lot. Calves can be very expensive.
この子牛は約100万ぐらいです。
Hiroki doesn't raise his cattle from birth. At 10 months old, calves are also sold at auctions throughout Japan. Hiroki spends almost half of his time at work buying calves, and he's very demanding.
まずは、顔を見ます。そして額が広い眉間といいますかね、額が広い牛は口が大きいので餌も食い込みもいいということで、あと角も綺麗な角を整っとる牛をまず見まして、その次に後ろから、お尻の方を見て、尻尾の上がり下がりとか、体格とか、全体的にしっかりした肥育できる牛を選びます。この子牛は抜群に最高級の BMS12 が私の中ではもう確定しています。
BMS12 is the highest marbling grade for Wagyu in Japan. The more intense the marbling, the higher the price. For customers in Tokyo, 100 grams of sirloin costs 10,000 yen. But that's still much less than what Parisians are paying at Mariagania, where the same cut is sold at €360. The most premium cut, tenderloin, sells for €5,000 per kilogram.
Comme on a bien respecté la température, le melting point c'est très bon. Dès que j'ai mis dans ma bouche, ça fond directement. Donc comme on a la chaleur naturelle de la bouche, donc ça aide à atteindre la température qu'on a besoin. Donc ça prend secondes. C'est pas ma première fois de goûter ça, mais chaque fois que je goûte, j'ai rien à dire.
The Paris restaurant was the first to successfully export Matsusaka Wagyu out of Japan and include it on its menu. Its most expensive tasting menu costs €520. Matsusaka Wagyu is heavily regulated. To include Matsusaka beef on the menu, the restaurant had to follow strict rules. The Paris restaurant needed to apply for a license, which took a year to be accredited. To maintain it, the restaurant needs to have a high rating on Google Maps, and there can't be another restaurant serving Matsusaka Wagyu within an 840-meter radius. As of 2023, Hiroki has shipped only 3 cows to Maria Canea. Due to this limited supply, the €520 menu with Ito Ranch's premium tenderloin is served to only 1 table per day. This exclusivity is set to get a little bit looser. In the last 10 years, Japan has been a major importer of US beef, importing an average of $1.83 billion a year. Meanwhile, millions worth of Wagyu made the opposite journey as it reached international fame. A decline in tourism after the COVID-19 outbreak and a change in consumer behavior toward cheaper meats exacerbated this. And now, Japanese cattle farmers are looking outside the country's borders. The export quota for Matsusaka has jumped from 24 in 2022 to 700 in 2024. Of those, it's the most premium cuts that are exported, going to high-end restaurants like Maria Canea in Paris. This is pushing farmers who want to ship abroad to bet on those lucrative but dangerous long fattening periods.
45ヶ月と、私も初めに世界初この45ヶ月で出すっていうのは生まれた。